Just when you thought the integrated bracelet era was over, Citizen released this. It's affordable and it's smoking hot. Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Integrated bracelet watches have been all the rage for the last couple of years, and despite a few comments to the contrary, they still seem to be all the rage. They're still selling in big numbers. And at the affordable end of the market, that charge was spearheaded, of course, by the Tissot PRX, Swiss-made Tissot PRX. But not to be outdone, the Japanese fought back with the excellent Citizen Tsuyosa. Now, the automatic Citizen was cheaper than the quartz Tissot and was available in arguably a more attractive and more interesting range of colours. And now Citizen have done exactly what Orient did with the super popular Bambino a couple of years ago. They've released a Tsuyosa Small Second. Is it the best version of the Tsuyosa so far? And is it therefore the best affordable integrated bracelet watch on the market? That is what we're here to find out. Not only have they upgraded the movement, but they've also had a crack at the dial of this one at the same time, because the Small Second features a beautiful guilloche patterning not normally found from big brand watches at the price. Let's talk about price early today then. The official Citizen RRP is $850 Australian dollars. But you know what we think of Citizen's official RRPs, don't you? Well, I cannot reveal where I bought this watch, but I paid 499 Aussie. I still think that's maybe $50 too much. I think this one's going to settle in a little bit closer to half of the RRP. That seems to be the kind of norm these days with Citizen Group products, but it is so hot right now, and if you want so hot right now, then you're going to have to pay a little bit extra for it, and I did. So regardless of what you actually end up paying, what do you get for your money? Well, I think you get a really resolved, really attractive and very wearable integrated bracelet watch that doesn't particularly look or feel like an integrated bracelet watch. In terms of dimensions, they're almost identical to the Central Second version that preceded it. Those being therefore 40mm in diameter, bang on 12mm thick, with a lug-to-lug of 45mm. Lug width, of course, is not applicable today, but to give you a reference, the width of that first link that emerges from the case is 21mm. The bracelet then runs at just under 20mm on my calipers, all the way to the butterfly clasp. As sized for me, it weighs in at 137 grams, 50 meters of water resistance, push-pull crown only, flat sapphire crystal though, which is great to see on an affordable watch from a big Japanese brand, and the movement in the back is a Miyota, of course, because Citizen owns Miyota. It's an 8322A. And there it is, because there's a display case back on this one today. So what can we tell by that number 8322? Well, we know it's an 8000 series. We also know that it's an 83 and not an 82. That means it's a premium 8000 series featuring a skeletonized rotor, some Tokyo stripes, some blue screws, and crucially, a 60-hour power reserve. Now, I give the 8215, as featured in the regular Tsuyosa, a bit of stick because it deserves it. But once you factor in the extra power reserve of the 83, it's a pretty good entry-level automatic. It both hacks and hand winds, features 21 joules, no date in this configuration of course, but a small second indicator instead. Accuracy though is still pretty loose, from -20 to +40 seconds per day from the factory, so you can't have everything. The case is slightly unusual, but definitely interesting. It's got a very high and relatively thin mid case. Now, this serves to make it look slimmer in profile, but doesn't actually make it wear any better on wrist. Have a look, there is a lot of case back here that's simply never going to disappear in the back of your arm, regardless of what visual trickery you try and pull off. High polish sides with a further high polished lug-to-lug chamfer though, a linear brush to the upper lug surfaces, and then a two-stage high polished fixed bezel with that nicely integrated flat sapphire. Below the midline, the case is brushed, and then the case back is high polished, so you cannot accuse Citizen of not putting a variety of finishes on this thing. You can accuse them of putting a tiny and fairly hopeless crown on it, because they have. It's down at the 415, and it does at least integrate nicely into the case, very much like the crowns on the old school 37mm Seiko 5s. It's pretty fiddly to operate though, at least this one doesn't have a date, and that high power reserve gives you a fighting chance of taking it off on the weekend and then not needing to use the crown on a Monday morning. Now the bracelet, before I even show you on the watch, let's look at these two pictures side by side. You can see the bracelets are similar but different across the two Tsuyosa models. Tsuyosa means strength, by the way, in case like me, you're not fluent in Japanese. They're both 3-link president style, but the small second has a much broader mid-link than the central second. I think they did this because they are now offering leather straps as an option, and that gives them a more usable end link for swapping between leather, rubber and the metal bracelet. As you can see, you can take the bracelet off very easily, but you still can't use any of your strap collection with the Tsuyosa. This is still very much an integrated bracelet design though, and in practice doesn't change how the watch wears massively. It does mean that there's more polish than brush proportional in the bracelet than there used to be. I think that combined with the dial patterning suggests that the small second is a little more formal than the central second. More on that later. Anyway, this one offers decent comfort, there's plenty of space between the links, the butterfly clasp is fine, and they do have a couple of, well, I wouldn't describe them as half links, they're more like 2/3 links to give you a bit of sizing flexibility, but obviously not as much flexibility as you would get with a clasp with micro adjustment. Having said that, the clasp on the central second Tsuyosa was arguably the cheapest and crappiest bit of the whole watch, so I for one am not mourning its loss. Alright, the dial. We've already had a brief look. Let's get stuck in again with the macro lens. It's lovely. And you know what? So is this blue. I normally go to extreme lengths not to buy blue watches. I'm not normally a fan of the colour, but this blue is cracking. I would describe it as a kind of aqua blue. It's on the lighter side with just a touch of green in there. It's very attractive, and I think more attractive than the gold tone one, which I also had a look at when I picked this one up from the shop. Overall, the Tsuyosa has quite a bit of Rolex in it in terms of the indices. They are rectangular batons, doubles at 12 and 6 and singles everywhere else, and stick hands that are narrower than the batons. All very reminiscent of the Oyster Perpetual and the Datejust in particular. The case, I think, is also reminiscent of the Rolex Oyster Quartz in some ways. No complaints with any of that though. The high polished silver hands are beveled down the middle, but they're not really the star of the show here today. The guilloche patterning on the dial very much is, and it's very nicely done. Now under macro it's clear that this is molded rather than etched, but that's okay, it still manages to look more than crisp enough and more than detailed enough. The small second above the 6 is recessed, and it features a second hand that colour matches nicely with the dial. Dial text is also kept to a minimum, just the Citizen brand name and automatic, which has now moved north of the pinion to join the brand. Overall, I really like it. It's definitely not as in your face as a lot of the cocktail time dials are. Perhaps Citizen will remedy this by producing some brighter colour versions in the future, but this blue works just fine for me, thank you very much. And what about on wrist, how does it wear? Well, it wears very nicely. It doesn't feel like an integrated bracelet watch particularly, certainly not one with flat links like the PRX for example, which can end up feeling a little bit cuff-like. Whereas this one is much more like a regular non-integrated bracelet watch. As you saw, there's a lot of space between the links, so it will breathe well in warm weather. The case is sympathetic to one's wrist. Now that elevated mid case tries to make the watch look slimmer than it really is. It's partly successful, and the crown at least is tucked away at the 415. At just under 140 grams, it feels solid but not overly weighty. From memory, I think that's around 10 grams heavier than the central second. I presume most of that is the bracelet, but you don't really feel the extra weight on wrist. This thing has heaps of wrist presence though, thanks to the high polished bezel, all the high polished chamfers, and the very broad high polished mid links of the bracelet. Plus you get a bit more light play from the patterning of the dial than you do with the regular flat surface central second models. So a few changes then, all of which seem to push this watch away from sporty and towards dressy. Alright, moans and niggles. I haven't shown you the Lume yet, which is never a good sign, and indeed the Lume is pretty dreadful. Citizen used their own proprietary Lume called Natchu Bright. In this case, I take issue with the second half of that particular portmanteau. It just isn't bright. It's pretty dull initially, and then when I turn the speed up, it just doesn't last. It is gone. It's exactly the same as the Lume on the central second, i.e. poor. Plus, the change to a butterfly clasp means you're pretty much obliged to wear this one loose. Now, it's not particularly heavy and that crown is designed for comfort, but yeah, you're sizing based on those 2/3 links rather than anything smaller than that. Plus, there is only 50 meters of water resistance. You know, I guess the poor Lume and the slightly underwhelming water resistance just betray the fact that this is still a big brand, affordable Japanese watch. At least it has sapphire, something that is increasingly common these days, but was actually quite rare at this point from Japan 5 years ago. But you know what? I think what Citizen have done here is play to this watch's strengths, or perhaps perfectly mask its weaknesses. By adding a slightly fancier dial design and more bling to the bracelet, they have pushed this watch in a dressier direction, and therefore the poor lume and poor water resistance don't matter nearly as much because they've made it less of a sports watch than the Central Second is. And in doing so, I think they've made the best Tsuyosa so far. If we return to the price, I said at the beginning that the automatic Citizen cost less than the Quartz Tissot. The Small Second automatic Citizen now costs about the same as a Quartz Tissot, but features a more attractive dial and now a considerable upgrade in terms of movement, better finishing, higher power reserve, hacking feature, etc, etc. I think this is a really rather compelling proposition, particularly if you don't already have something like it in your collection. It looks good, it wears well, it has by far and away the best warranty at its price point. The current colour versions are all very attractive, but it's surely only a matter of time before they start producing a few more vibrant versions with this Small Second complication. Integrated bracelet fatigue might be on the slow burn, but watches like this prove there's still plenty of life in that particular old dog. So there you have it. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. While you're here, I guess it makes sense to watch my full review of the Central Second Tsuyosa or my size comparison video between the 35 and 40mm PRX. I'll see you all again in the next one.